In the small town of Slaughter, Louisiana, most people know their neighbors. It is the kind of place where life moves slowly, and pillars of the community are respected without question. Sheila and Clay Fletcher were those people. Sheila was a former town official. Clay was an officer for a local nonprofit. They were churchgoers, active in their neighborhood, and seemingly devoted parents. But on January 3, 2022, a 911 call from the Fletcher home would pull back the curtain on a horror so profound it would redefine the meaning of neglect in the American justice system. When paramedics arrived, Sheila Fletcher met them at the door. She told them her 36-year-old daughter, Lacey, had stopped breathing. They expected to find a medical emergency, perhaps a sudden illness or a tragic accident. Instead, they walked into a living room that looked ordinary at first glance, but contained a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There, sitting on a worn leather sofa, was the body of Lacey Fletcher. She wasn't just dead. She was upright, partially clothed, and staring blankly ahead. But as the investigators moved closer, they realized the impossible. Lacey had not just been sitting there for a few hours. According to the medical examiner, she had been sitting in that exact spot for at least 12 years. She had sat there so long that her body had literally fused to the upholstery. The leather and foam of the couch had worn away under her weight, and she had effectively melted into the furniture. Her skin was covered in ulcers that reached her bones. She was covered in her own waste, and maggots were discovered living within her wounds. This was not a quick death. This was a decade of slow, agonizing torture in the middle of a suburban living room, while her parents lived their lives just a few feet away. To understand how a young woman could disappear in plain sight, we have to look back at who Lacey Fletcher was. In her early years, Lacey was a vibrant, social teenager. In the late 1990s, she was a smart girl who played volleyball and enjoyed her small-town life. But as she entered her late teens, things began to change. Lacey started struggling with severe social anxiety and was later diagnosed with autism. By the early 2000s, her world began to shrink. She stopped going to school. She stopped seeing friends. Her parents eventually withdrew her from society entirely, claiming they were homeschooling her. To the neighbors, it seemed like Lacey had simply moved away or was being cared for privately. No one questioned the Fletchers. They were good people. But inside that house, Lacey was becoming a ghost. The medical details of her final years are almost too much to comprehend. When the coroner, Dr. Ewell Bickham, performed the autopsy, he described the scene as total and complete medical neglect. Lacey weighed only 96 pounds at the time of her death. She was suffering from chronic malnutrition, acute starvation, and sepsis. The autopsy revealed that she had also contracted COVID-19, though that was not the primary cause of death. The most terrifying revelation from the medical report was that Lacey had likely been conscious for the vast majority of her suffering. She wasn't in a coma. She wasn't unaware. She was a prisoner of her own body and her parents' silence. The couch had become her world. She ate there, she slept there, and she died there. The floor beneath the sofa was actually rotted through because of the years of neglect. When investigators questioned Sheila and Clay Fletcher, their story was chillingly calm. They claimed that Lacey had locked-in syndrome, a condition where a person is conscious but cannot move or speak. They told police that Lacey refused to leave the couch and that she didn't want to move. They claimed they brought her meals and tried to clean her, but that she simply wouldn't cooperate. But the evidence told a different story. If Lacey truly had locked-in syndrome, she required 24-hour professional medical care, which her parents never sought. In fact, Lacey had not seen a doctor in over 20 years. Experts argued that no human being would choose to sit in their own waste until their skin rotted away. This wasn't a daughter refusing help. This was parents who had checked out. They had simply stopped seeing Lacey as a human being. They treated her like a piece of furniture that they occasionally fed. The legal battle that followed was a roller coaster for the community of Slaughter. In May 2022, Sheila and Clay Fletcher were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The town was in shock. How could the people they saw at church and at town meetings be capable of this? But just as the case was moving forward, A legal technicality caused the initial indictments to be tossed out due to specific wording issues. For a moment, it looked like they might walk free. However, the prosecution was determined. A new grand jury re-indicted the couple in 2023. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of the living room, the couch, and the medical reports were so graphic that even the grand jurors were reportedly visible, shaken. The case finally came to a head in early 2024. Rather than face a trial for second-degree murder, which could have resulted in life in prison, the Fletchers reached a plea deal. They pleaded no contest to the reduced charge of manslaughter. In the American legal system, a no-contest plea means the defendant does not admit guilt, but accepts the punishment as if they were guilty. In March 2024, the sentencing finally took place. The courtroom was packed. Dr. Bickham, the coroner, testified again, stating that in all his years, he had never seen anything like this. He called it a slow death that occurred in the middle of a typical American home. The judge was equally horrified. Sheila and Clay Fletcher were each sentenced to 40 years in prison. However, per the plea agreement, 20 of those years were suspended. This means they will serve 20 years behind bars, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. For many, this sentence felt far too light. Lacey had spent at least 12 years, 4,380 days, suffering on that couch. 20 years in a prison cell seemed like a small price to pay for a decade of torture. The Lacey Fletcher case is a dark stain on the history of Louisiana, but it is also a warning for the rest of the country. It exposes a terrifying reality that the most extreme crimes don't always happen in dark alleys or at the hands of masked strangers. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who look exactly like us. They are the neighbors who wave from their porch. They are the officials who run our towns. This case proves that silence is a weapon. Lacey disappeared because no one asked enough questions. The medical system failed her, the social system failed her, and her own parents, the people meant to protect her most, became her jailers. When you look at a house in your own neighborhood today, remember Lacey Fletcher. Remember that safety is often an illusion. Behind some doors, there are secrets that the human mind can barely wrap itself around. Lacey's story is a call for us all to be more vigilant, to look out for the vulnerable, and to never assume that good people aren't capable of the unthinkable. Lacey Ellen Fletcher deserved a life of dignity, love, and care. Instead, she became a symbol of a failure so profound, it defies logic. She was a woman who was forgotten by everyone except the two people who should have remembered her most, and they chose to let her melt away. If you want more real, documented true crime stories told without exaggeration or fiction, consider subscribing to Dread Docket. We believe that by telling these stories, we keep the memory of the victims alive and ensure that these horrors are never forgotten, because some of the darkest stories are also the most real. I'm your host, and this has been the heartbreaking case of Lacey Fletcher. Thank you for watching, and stay vigilant.